So today we'll discuss about adrenal gland and its hormones and disorders. Adrenal glands are two in number. They are roughly triangular in shape. Each is situated on the upper side of each kidney. That is the reason why they are called as also suprarenal. If these are two kidneys and these roughly triangular shaped adrenal glands are present on the upper pole of each kidney. When compared with the left adrenal gland, right gland is said to be smaller, left is said to be larger, and this is its weight. And average weight at birth is said to be more when compared with the average weight in the adults. It is between 5 and 9. The entire adrenal gland is covered by a capsule and is divided into two parts, an outer cortex and an inner medulla. So there is a capsule, there is a cortex, and there is a medulla. Three scientists were awarded with Nobel Prize for their work on adrenal gland. Edward Calvin Kendall, along with Thaddeus Richstein and Philip S. Hinch. For their work with the hormones of the adrenal gland, they were awarded the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine. Kendall, Richstein, and Hinch. These three names you can remember. And coming to the adrenal gland structure, internal histological structure, when we remove the capsule, we see cortex and medulla. And the cortex is again divided into three regions. So if this is cortex and followed by medulla, the cortex is again divided into three regions. One is called as zona glomerulosa. This is the first one. Second one, that means from outside to inside. Second one is called as zona fasciculata. And the third region near the medulla is called as zona reticularis. Okay, so it is distinguished into three regions: the cortex, zona glomerulosa towards the capsule, zona reticularis towards medulla, and zona fasciculata in the middle. Why they are given these respective names? In zona glomerulosa, the cells are said to be arranged side by side almost like a layer of cells. In fasciculata, as the name implies, the cells are arranged into columns. Fasciculus. You have studied in muscle bundle. Fasciculus. So these are bundled together, the cells are. Hence, this is given the name fasciculata. In case of reticularis, as the name implies, the cells are formed into network. The cells are formed into network, reticulum. Hence the name reticularis. So these are the three divisions by which the adrenal cortex is made up of, and the names were given based on the histological structure of the and arrangement of the cells in different patterns. And coming to the cortex again, histologically it is divided into three regions as we have just seen. The outer region is called as zona glomerulosa. It is present below the capsule. It has columnar cells and it secretes hormones called as mineralocorticoids. The hormones secreted by zona glomerulosa are mineralocorticoids, and the predominant hormone of the mineralocorticoids is aldosterone. Okay, so whenever some question is being asked about this one, identify the mineralocorticoid from the given hormones. You have to identify anything that is suffix, even if it is in suffix in, or the entire name is as like this. Aldosterone is the correct answer. And the second one, the middle layer is the zona fasciculator. It is made up of polyhedral cells organized into columns, and it secretes glucocorticoids. And the third one, zona reticularis, which is the innermost layer towards the medulla, where the cells are formed into a irregular network, and they are secreting hormones called as sex corticoids. So, whenever you see these, there are three kinds of hormones. All these hormones are given the common name corticoids. Okay, so what is a corticoid? It is derived from two words. One is cortex, that means these are the hormones which are secreted from cortex, and the other is steroid. So together, cortex plus steroid constitute cortex, cortic, and steroidoid corticoids. So the steroidal hormones secreted by the adrenal cortex are called as corticoids. Zona glomerulosa secretes corticoids which are involved in regulation of mineral metabolism. Hence, they are called as mineralocorticoids. And the others are involved in glucocorticoids in carbohydrate metabolism. And the third one are involved in what we call uh, sex of the individual, functioning of the gonads in some way or the other way. Okay, and you might have observed um, in some girls there are certain mustaches. There are certain boys who sound like girls, isn't it? The voice is said to be somewhat similar to girls. So, what are these things? Female have ovaries and they secrete ovarian hormones. So, females have girl characters. Male have testes, they secrete testosterone and they have boy-like characters. But even in male, there are ovarian hormones secreted by the zona reticularis, and even in the female, there is androgens. There are androgens secreted by the zona reticularis. And anything that is in excess, it is required in normal proportions only for maintaining the delicate balance between the both sexes, and that's affecting only to one sex in an individual. But anything a small tumor in zona reticularis increases secretion of the sex hormones, results in certain feminine characters in males and masculine characters in females. That is the only difference. If it is still more excess, then it may result in what we call sterility also. And coming to the hormones of adrenal cortex, scientists have seen nearly 50 steroidal hormones that are being secreted or they are isolated from the adrenal cortex, and they have found only 7 to 8 of them are having any physiological activity. That means activities that are related to the physiological functions of the body, including metabolism also. So we are going to study only few of these, not all the 50. Okay. These physiologically active substances can be divided into adrenal corticoids, glucocorticoids, and mineralocorticoids, which contain 21 carbon atoms. They contain this steroidal hormone contains 21 hormones, and the other one, that is sex hormones or sex steroids, they are said to be having 19 carbon atoms in their structure. This is how we are going to differentiate between these two. These adrenal cortical hormones or corticoids are three types: glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and sex corticoids. We divide them into two based on the number of carbon atoms in the structure. These two are C21 and these two are C19 steroidal hormones. And coming to glucocorticoids, these are different types. Number one, 11 dehydrocorticosterone. Number two, corticosterone. Number three, cortisone. And number four, 17 hydroxycorticosterone. Okay, and these were given the names based on their discoverers. So Kendall first isolated this, hence it is called as the compound A of Kendall, and followed by Kendall isolated another hormone from this adrenal cortex, and this was called as compound B by Kendall. So 11 dehydrocorticosterone is called as compound A of Kendall, and corticosterone is called as compound B of Kendall. Okay, and Kendall also absorbs so many other hormones, but we are saying that there are physiologically active hormones are very few. So skipping C and D, we are going to E. This is called as cortisone. Okay, and its chemical structure is chemically it is called as 17 hydroxy 11 dehydrocorticosterone. So in the 11th carbon position, hydrogen is removed, only oxygen is present, hence it is called as 11 dehydrocorticosterone. Okay, and this is compound E of Kendall. And likewise, 17 hydroxycorticosterone, and this is compound F of Kendall. So you need not remember all these things. Even compounds of Kendall also examinations never I have encountered any such question in the past 30 years. So what you have to remember is only these four names: 17 dehydrocorticosterone, corticosterone, cortisone, 17 hydroxy corticosterone. Sometimes in some books, based on certain molecular rearrangements, the term cortisol is also derived, and you have to remember anything that is related to corti. Okay, that is glucocorticoids. And coming to the mineralocorticoids, and there are three types. One is the main one, aldosterone. We call it as 18 aldocorticosterone. Okay, it can exist in aldehyde form as well as hemiacetal form. Okay, and what you have to remember is only its name, aldosterone. And the second one is steroid, which is called as deoxycortisone or deoxycorticoid 11 deoxycorticosterone, based on at one position whether hydroxyl group is present or aldehyde or ketone group is present. These were given their respective names, so you need not bother about them. You just remember deoxycortisone. And the third one is said to be 17 hydroxy 11 deoxycorticosterone, and this is called as compound S of Richstein, one of the three Nobel Prize awardees with respect to adrenal gland hormones. Richstein's compound C is 17 hydroxy 11 deoxycorticosterone. Among all, for examination purpose, you have to remember only aldosterone, and to remember that it exists in aldehyde and hemiacetal forms. And the six corticoids, these are C19 hormones. That means they have 19 carbons. And we can see all the male as well as female sex hormones being secreted in both sexes. First one we call it as androgens, exemplified by androsterone. There is another variant of this one, dehydroepiandrosterone, both the same. This is androsterone, and just a chemical rearrangement results molecular rearrangement in its chemical structure results in dehydroepiandrosterone. So these two are male sex hormones, and we can simply call them as androgens. And these two are female sex hormones. One is estrogen, called as estradiol, and the other one is progesterone. So these can be called, both can be called as estrogens commonly. So when we refer to estrogens, a plural, it refers to both. Singular refers to only one hormone. Thus, male secretes female sex hormones, female secretes male sex hormones, because of which some female have male characteristics like mustaches that I have told you before, and some female have voice like that of a male, and males have very less growth of hair and body like female, or their voice or tone is said to be somewhat feminine whenever these hormones are said to be secreted in quantities more than normal. And coming to the mechanism of action of adrenal steroids. The receptors for steroid hormones are located intracellularly. Can anybody tell me, if you have heard about the class signal transduction, why these are located intracellularly? Why the receptors of steroidal hormones are intracellular? Why not they are extracellular? Are you listening? Somebody respond, please. Ready? Ready? Exit అయిపోయారా? Somebody respond. Huh? నా వాయిస్ వినబడుతుందమ్మా? Hmm? నాకు మీ వాయిస్ ఎవరిది వినబట్లా. వినబడుతుందా? ఇప్పుడే వినబడింది. నేను అడిగిన ప్రశ్నకు సమాధానాలు చెప్పాలి. Why the receptors for steroid hormones are located intracellularly? With respect to hormone action, I have told you if this is the plasma membrane, intracellular fluid, and this is extracellular fluid, hormones are of three types. Can anybody tell me, based on chemical nature, what are the three different kinds of hormones? నేను చదవట్లేదు, మీరు అర్థమైంది అది నాకు. ఇలాగైతే మీకు పీజీ సెట్ పక్కన పెట్టండి. ఏపీ పీజీ సెట్ కూడా రాదు. Proteins, steroids, and biological peptides come in the category of protein hormones only. Proteins, because they cannot enter the cell, they are large in size and they remain outside, and they are bound to extracellular receptors. Steroidal hormones and biological amines, because they are said to be smaller in nature, and for example, steroid hormones which are lipid soluble, they can pass into the cytoplasm or even into the nucleoplasm, where they can bind with the intracellular receptors. They can be cytoplasmic or nucleoplasmic. So because all the corticosteroids are steroidal in nature, their receptors are located intracellularly. Okay, so that These, because they are lipid soluble, they can penetrate the cell membrane. They can penetrate the cell membrane. Why they can penetrate the cell membrane? Because one thing, they are smaller in size. Second thing is they are lipid soluble. And what do they do after binding to the receptor? They modify the intracellular metabolism directly. They modify the intracellular metabolism directly. How? By activating certain inactive enzymes in the cell. And coming to the functions of adrenal cortex as a whole, that means we have three different kinds of hormones: mineralocorticoids, sex corticoids, glucocorticoids. And I'm going to teach you the functions of not singly each one, not related to each one, but whole all together. Okay. And coming to the three adrenocorticoids, the first one are mineralocorticoids. So as I've told you before, these are involved in the regulation of mineral metabolism. They're exemplified by two: deoxycorticosterone, aldosterone. So these are the two names which we have to remember. So they, in order to regulate mineral metabolism, they have to work on the kidney. Okay, they have to control the function of kidney. So you might have studied kidney in your degree, and let me explain you something about this so that you can understand what this is. So coming to the kidney. So the kidney has a number of nephrons, and the nephron has glomerulus with its Bowman's capsule. Okay, so this is glomerulus, the network of capillaries, and this is Bowman's capsule. This is followed by uriniferous tubule, comprising of proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, several of which are connected to one single collecting duct. Now, what happens is when the blood flows to the kidney, the, the blood that is collected from the liver, which contains all the digested substances. So, the food that is required for the body, which has to be distributed through different cells of the body, is also present in the blood that is supplied to the kidney through the blood vessels, mainly to the nephron. And it contains, in addition to this, some of the substances which need to be excreted. In addition to this, it has plasma containing 90% of water. These are the three things, most important things that are there in the blood that is supplied to the nephron. So when water gets filtered into the Bowman's capsule, so we come across with number one, water, number two, urea, and all the digested food substances, including the vitamins and mineral components. So they reach the uriniferous tubule and pass on to the distal collecting duct, and from there through Bellini duct they reach the pelvis, and there to the ureter, and finally reach the urinary bladder. And during this course, what happens is you might have studied that the glomerular capillaries, which come out of the glomerulus, form into capillary network around proximal and distal convoluted tubule and around Henle's loop and even collecting duct. So whatever the substances that are present here, they can be absorbed from the nephron into the blood as they course through the uriniferous tubule. And at two places, in proximal convoluted tubule, water is reabsorbed. In distal convoluted tubule, water is reabsorbed. Henle's loop, water is reabsorbed. And collecting duct, water is reabsorbed. And reabsorption of water is not just like that. It is associated always here in case of kidney, sorry, excuse me, with sodium ions. We know about sodium potassium pump, isn't it? For every 3 sodium ions that are pumped out, 2 sodium ions are pumped in, whether in opposite directions or any direction, ECF to ICF or ICF to ACF, whatever it may be. So what happens now here is, let us talk about distal convoluted tube. In distal convoluted tubule, if the glomerular filtrate that comes to the uriniferous tubule here, if it contains water that needs to be reabsorbed into the circulation, what happens is water is not directly reabsorbed. First, sodium ions are reabsorbed. Sodium ions are reabsorbed into the what? Distal convoluted tubule. From the distal convoluted tubule into the blood capillaries that surround it. Once the sodium gets into the blood, now what happens? The concentration with respect to these solute substances rises, in order to decrease which it is followed by water reabsorption. So, in order to absorb water, what has to be done? Sodium has to be transported. So, this is the main fundamental rule for the absorption of water. As sodium is said to be absorbed, what is happening? Potassium leaves into the uriniferous tubule and there it is excreted. So, always associated with sodium and potassium, there is absorption or inhibition of absorption of water molecules. That is how, by affecting these minerals, these elements, whatever you call it may be, here the absorption of water is said to be regulated. It is what the function of the mineralocorticoids is. So now let us see simply what happens. Its main function is to increase reabsorption of sodium, so that's where it also goes and concentration rises by renal tubules, opposite to which decrease the reabsorption of potassium. So that what happens? Sodium reabsorbed, potassium is excreted. Okay, so thus by controlling the excretion of these salts, the mineralocorticoids keep an adequate balance of number one, inorganic ions in blood, number two, body fluids like water. Okay, that is the main function of this hormones. Next, coming to the water balance. So, just not a regulation of the mineral ions or inorganic ions like sodium and potassium. It is also involved in water balance as we have discussed. They stimulate water absorption by the renal tubules and thus regulate water balance. And this is done in the following way. Number one, aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption and excretion of potassium and hydrogen in the renal tubules. So from distal convoluted tubule into the peritubular capillaries, that is blood, what is transported? Sodium is reabsorbed and potassium and hydrogen ions are said to be excreted. They reach the distal convertibule. From there, they reach the collecting duct and finally the urinary bladder. Next, how does this happen? Aldosterone activates mineralocorticoid receptors in the distal convoluted tubules of the kidney, leading to the increased permeability of sodium. So, how sodium gets absorbed? If this is the distal convoluted tubule, it has cells in its walls, and these cells have to transport sodium. So, in order to increase the permeability of the sodium ions, the receptors located here in the wall of the distal convoluted tubule are activated so that sodium ions get reabsorbed. Okay, next one, that is function of adrenal cortex related to carbohydrate metabolism. So we have seen the function of mineralocorticoids where they control mineral metabolism. Number one, number two. These two are said to be controlled. And the second one is said to be control of water balance. How? First, sodium reabsorption followed by water reabsorption. And the second one is potassium excretion and hydrogen ion excretion. These are the two things we have to remember with respect to the control of water balance. So you might have a doubt why the water balance has to be controlled. Why? Because if someone drinks more water, if someone drinks more water, what has to happen? Excess water, which is more than that of the capacity of blood vessels and heart pumping, has to be eliminated, isn't it? So, for the reason of which, here, if the sodium ions along with water gets reabsorbed every time, even if excess water you take, then what happens? The same blood volume is maintained. So, blood volume has to be maintained. So, that means the blood volume which is increased is maintained. But the blood volume of 5 to 6 liters has to be maintained. You have drunk extra 2 liters or 1 liter of water. So these 2 liters have to be excreted. And that is how water balance in the body is maintained. So if aldosterone is not secreted, when the blood volume, that means the water volume of the blood increases due to increased water, okay, then what happens? Sodium reabsorption is stopped, so that water reabsorption is stopped. When the blood volume is said to be reducing because you're walking in a desert, you're losing water through sweat and also through urine and other mechanisms. In order to maintain the body temperature, the body does so many functions. So the water is getting depleted, it is getting down to 4 or 3.5, 4.8 liters and something like that. Then what happens? The body needs to conserve water. So then water reabsorption takes place and concentrated urine is excreted. So in the first case, water is not reabsorbed, diluted urine goes out. In the second case, when body needs to conserve water, concentrated urine goes out. That is how the water balance is maintained. And the two important hormones that are involved in maintaining the water balance are aldosterone 1, the other is antidiuretic hormone, which we have discussed already while dealing with pituitary gland. And coming to the third important function of the cortical hormones is control of carbohydrate metabolism. And this is not with respect to mineralocorticoids. This function is attributed to glucocorticoids. So, how the carbohydrate metabolism is regulated? Number one, they stimulate the formation of glycogen in the liver. That means glucose to glycogen. We call this process as glycogenesis. Okay. Next, second one, increase gluconeogenesis in the liver especially from the protein. Okay, increase gluconeogenesis in the liver, especially from the protein, which function is almost opposite to that of the function of insulin. Okay, number three, it decreases glucose uptake and oxidation by tissues by decreasing glucose phosphorylation. What is the function of insulin? We have discussed. Whenever the blood glucose level increases, insulin releases and it decreases the blood glucose level. How? By changing the permeability of the hepatocytes. These are the hepatocytes of the liver. So glucose is present outside. So insulin binds with the receptors present on the surface of the hepatocytes of liver. This is liver. Now what happens? Glucose permeability increases. Okay. So when glucose permeability increases, glucose from blood goes into the liver and blood glucose concentration is decreased. But here it depresses glucose uptake. That means glucose is not permitted into the hepatocytes. It is maintained in the blood. So glucose concentration rises in the blood. Number two, if at all glucose is present here, it converts it into glycogen. Number three, once glucose goes into the cell, it has to be phosphorylated to form glucose 6 phosphate. Okay, so that what happens? Glucose in the form of phosphorylated form, it cannot leave the cell. That means it is trapped inside the hepatocyte for further processing. So here this depresses or decreases glucose uptake so that glucose will not enter, it remains in the blood. Even if some amount of glucose is said to be entered, what does it do? Number two, it decreases oxidation of glucose by tissues. Okay, how it is done? Number three, by decreasing glucose phosphorylation. And these two activities are said to be opposite to that of the activity of insulin. Insulin promotes gluconeogenesis. Insulin promotes phosphorylation of glucose and permeability of glucose. And opposite to this, glucocorticoids decrease, sorry, they increase gluconeogenesis and they decrease the glucose uptake, oxidation of glucose, and phosphorylation of glucose. So we can compare the glucocorticoids simply with the glucagon. With glucagon, you have studied throughout my entire career as a teacher by referring to so many books. I always see only diseases related to insulin. I always have a doubt. Why not there is a disease related to glucagon? What happens if glucagon is absent? We know if insulin is less secreted or if it is absent, we get diabetes mellitus. Then what happens if glucagon is absent? And what scientists say is there is no this is such reported till now. So whenever somebody goes to the doctor, then only doctor goes for a research on that particular aspect. Why he is not responding to these medicines, which actually has he has to respond for which, and then they come to a conclusion so particular disorder is associated with particular hormone. But here they are not tracing any such activity. Why? Because glucocorticoids are functioning similar to glucagon. So I feel it's just my feeling. It's not written in any book. Even if it is glucagon is absent in some other individual, there are glucocorticoids which are said to be replacing their activity. So thus we have two kinds of hormones in our body. Some are called as synergistic hormones. You can call it as synergistic hormones. Hormones which have the same effect, like glucocorticoids and glucagon. They have the same effect. They increase the blood glucose level, and hence both of these are called as hyperglycemic hormones. Hyperglycemic hormones. They increase the blood glucose level. Okay. Number two, second hormones are called as antagonistic hormones. What are antagonistic hormones? The hormones which work against each other, like insulin and glucagon. Now, glucocorticoids. It is hypoglycemic hormone, and these are hyperglycemic hormones. So, what I want to mention here is glucocorticoids and glucagon are having similar function. And the third important function is said to be the cortisol, that means a glucocorticoid, raises blood pyruvate level and helps in the synthesis of glucose from pyruvate in the liver. So we know when glucose is broken down during glycolysis, pyruvate is produced. And here it promotes formation of glucose from pyruvate in the liver in special circumstances like the operation of Cori cycle in muscle, which we are going to deal in the next 10 classes. Then it is said to be done that. Okay. Another one is said to be if the cortisol is produced in excess. Cortisol is produced in excess. What happens? It increases blood glucose level so that it results in hyperglycemia. When the hyperglycemia occurs, it depresses sensitivity to insulin. That means even insulin is said to be not released due to this effect. Okay, and it may result in diabetes mellitus like thing. And if the cortisol is deficient, it produces hypoglycemia so that sensitivity to insulin increases and the blood glucose level is said to be dropped down. Okay. And the next thing is the release of glucose from glycogen by epinephrine or glucagon depends on the presence of cortisol. So not just glucagon, not just epinephrine, even glucocorticoids are involved in the release of glucose from glycogen, where this controls these two hormones. These are involved in glycogenolysis. Okay, and glucocorticoids have to permit these two to do the function. Why? Because it stimulates formation of glycogen so that unless otherwise it permits them, they cannot function, and hence it is called as the permissive action. This effect of cortisol to allow epinephrine and glucagon to release glucose from glycogen by glycogenolysis is called as permissive action. In addition to carbohydrate metabolism, these hormones are also involved in the regulation of protein metabolism. Number one, they increase the rate of oxidative deamination, thereby the breakdown of proteins to amino acids, indicating increased liver transaminase activity. So, whenever there are transaminases, you might you have to think that there is amino acids being oxidatively deaminated. Okay, and oxidative deamination of amino acids is promoted. Thereby, we can say that there is a transaminase activity in the liver. Number two, as oxidative deamination of amino acid takes place, tissue proteins are broken down and body proteins are lost. When the body proteins are lost, what happens? Amino acids are oxidatively deaminated to produce carbon dioxide plus water plus energy, very little quantity of energy plus ammonia, which is excreted in the form of urea. So both of these, whether ammonia or urea, they carry nitrogen along with them. So it increases nitrogen excretion. At the same time, As it promotes breakdown of tissue proteins, it decreases synthesis of proteins. Okay, as it decreases synthesis of proteins, how it takes place? Even some of the glucogenic amino acids are there. They are converted to form glucose. Thus, it enhances or increases gluconeogenesis. So all these are said to be the functions which are said to be opposite to that of insulin. Okay. And if this hormone is said to be very much in excess, because of all these effects, it causes wasting of muscles because there are no proteins, osteoporosis, dissolution of lymphoid tissues, increased excretion of creatine. Creatine is the one which is produced when the proteins are said to be broken down, and also uric acid in the urine related to some intermediary metabolism. And coming to the control on fat metabolism, it stimulates fat absorption from the intestine. Are you following? I'm just going fast. So it stimulates fat absorption from the intestine and also mobilization of lipids from the adipocytes. So thus the fatty acids level in the blood can increase. When they are said to be the blood level fatty acids increases, they go to liver and where they get oxidized, releasing. When fatty acids are oxidized, it is called as beta oxidation of fatty acids, which releases carbon dioxide, water, energy in large quantities plus ketone bodies. Okay, next. There are some other effects. Just you just have to run through fastly. Nothing important of this. It has an effect on digestion because it stimulates the secretion of hydrochloric acid and also pepsin by the stomach. That is another one. Because it is involved in glucose metabolism, it increases basal metabolic rate. And the four important things that you have to remember is one is it is anti-lymphocytic. It has an anti-lymphocytic activity. So in examinations, whenever we come across with glucocorticoids, we speak of only carbohydrate metabolism that we have discussed just now. In addition to this, we have certain other important functions attributed to glucocorticoids, which may be asked in the examinations, and these are said to be one, two, three, four. You have to remember. One is it is anti-lymphocytic. That means it causes immunosuppression. It causes immunosuppression. So lymphocytic activity is said to be decreased. So that resistance to disease may increase here when the immunosuppression takes place. It is anti-inflammatory. It is anti-inflammatory. That means inflammation reaction will not take place and it suppresses the formation of antibodies. Number three, it is anti-allergic. How we know about this? Because it increases the what we call it decreases the eosinophil white blood cells. When we have eosinophils are said to be 2% in blood, whenever we get allergic symptoms, it increases up to 5 to 8% during allergy. And this is anti-allergic. That means it is having anti-eosinophilic activity. So what the scientists do, what the doctors do, when you go to a doctor for cold, he gives some Coldarin, etc. like this. For 2 days after all, 2 days after also you're getting the same. You're not getting any what we call relief from the cold. Then he goes for what we call it as blood test. In the blood test, he writes TC, sorry, DC, differential count of uh, blood. So differential count means how many neutrophils are there, basophils are there, eosinophils, monocytes, lymphocytes. of these eosinophilic and lymphocytic activities under the influence of glucocorticoids, isn't it? So what happens is when the blood lymphocytes increase to 5 to 8%, the doctor feels that your body is said to be allergic and he has to give some drugs which are said to be anti-allergic. So now there are some preparations in ointments in the form of drugs which contain this cortisol. You can see that when you take a pill, you see the composition. When you apply an ointment, you see the composition. In all this composition, these cortisols are said to be there if it is related to something like anti-allergic activity. And the most important thing is these hormones are involved in resistance against stress along with adrenaline and norepinephrine. And last one, they inhibit release of melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay, and there are two diseases associated with adrenal cortex. One is called as hypoadrenalism. Hypoadrenalism. What does it mean? Less secretion of cortical hormones of adrenal gland. So we can call it as hypofunction. This hypoadrenalism results in a disease called as Addison's disease. It results in Addison's disease. And this is the first disease that is discovered with respect to which, based on which, the endocrinology came into existence. And hence, Addison is called as father of endocrinology. Why is he called as father of endocrinology? Because of the discovery of this disease, we came to know that there are hormones in our body which are responsible for certain metabolic activities, thus non-secretion of which results in certain disorders like Addison's disorder. Okay, and this is characterized by the less secretion of mineralocorticoids, less secretion of glucocorticoids, and also sex corticoids, so that all the um, what we call functions which we have discussed now, control on mental metabolism, control on carbohydrate metabolism, fat metabolism, protein metabolism, all these are said to be affected, including the melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay, so because of proteins are said to be being destroyed and something else, what happens here? Addison's disease is characterized by certain characteristics. Number one, muscular weakness, and the individual is undergoing fatigue very easily. You cannot run not more than 1 kilometer or so. Before that only you get fatigue. Number two, vomiting, anorexia, hypochlorhydria. That means hydrogen chloride secretion is said to be decreased, and it results in gastrointestinal disturbance. And it results in low blood pressure, pigmentation of the skin. Why? Because it inhibits release of MSH. When adrenal cortical hormones are not secreted, MSH is not inhibited. Rather, MSH is said to be increased. It results in excess pigmentation of the body called as bronzing of skin. Okay, pigmentation of the skin is called as bronzing. It is one of the effects of Addison's disease which you have to remember. So when aldosterone is said to be low secreted, what happens? Ionic balance is disturbed, leading to restlessness, insomnia, lack of mental concentration. Why? Because water is required for every activity of the body. When this water balance, their bionic balance is disturbed, we get all these disorders, and we have what we call it as stress, and it results in hypoglycemia even because glucocorticoids are hyperglycemic hormones. When they're absent, it results in hypoglycemia. So when you know these functions, all these functions, you can easily remember all the symptoms or clinical features associated with the hypofunction of these hormones. Next, coming to the hyperfunction of adrenal cortex. Okay, we can call it as hyperadrenalism. Hyperadrenalism results in three kinds of diseases. One is Cushing syndrome. We already have discussed one disease called as Cushing's disease. That is disease associated with the pituitary gland. You have to remember that. And this is Cushing's syndrome. And second one is hyperaldosteronism. And third one is adrenogenital syndrome. Coming to the Cushing syndrome, it is found in adrenal tumor where adrenal gland is said to be having a tumor so that the concentration of these hormones is in excess. Or adrenal hyperplasia. What is hyperplasia? Increase in the number of cells. So any of these two, tumor also increases the cells, hyperplasia also increases cells, so that cortisol is secreted in excessive quantities. Okay, and it results in the secretion of adrenocorticotropic hormone also, and this is the main reason for the syndrome. And the clinical features are associated with the hyperaction of these hormones. Likewise, increased deposition of fat in the trunk. What does it do? The function on fat metabolism is it mobilizes fats from the fat depots, that means adipocytes. So opposite to that, here deposition of fat into the adipocytes takes place. At most importantly, at some places called as the limbs, mainly in the trunk region in the limbs, on the face, in the neck, resulting a buffalo hump, and also in abdomen. So these are the symptoms of Cushing syndrome. And in males, excessive hair growth takes place. Why? Androgen secretion increases more. Okay, so excess hair growth takes place, and this condition is called as hirsutism. So you have to remember hirsutism. What is hirsutism? It is excessive hair growth in males characterized by characterizing Cushing syndrome. And in case of females, masculinization takes place with respect to the growth of beard, mustaches, etc. And all the things that are attributed to carbohydrate metabolism, like asthenia means general weakness, wasting of the muscles of the limbs because they are said to be excessively deposited with the fat. In Addison's disease, it is hypoglycemia, and here it is hyperglycemia, leading to insulin resistant diabetes with glycosuria. Elimination of glucose through urine is called as glycosuria. And retention of sodium and the excretion of potassium in the plasma. Whenever aldosterone increases, sodium reabsorption takes place, so that water reabsorption takes place, opposite to which potassium and hydrogen ions are said to be excreted. That is what is happening here also. Sodium is retained and potassium is said to be excreted. And eosinopenia, that means number of eosinophil cells, WBC, decreases. Lymphocytopenia, number of lymphocytes decreases. And polycythemia, number of RBC increases. These are the characteristics of Cushing's syndrome. And coming to the second one, hyperaldosteronism. It is of two types, primary and secondary hyperaldosteronism. Primary aldosteronism is called as Conn's syndrome. Conn's syndrome. It is caused by excessive production of aldosterone. Why? There is a tumor in the zona glomerulosa which secretes the aldosterone. It is characterized by number one, high blood pressure, because more sodium intake, more water intake, more blood volume, more heart rate, resulting in blood pressure. And muscular weakness, retention of sodium, alkalosis, tetany, and excess excretion of water through urine called as polyuria. These are the characteristics associated with hyperaldosteronism, which is primary. And secondary hyperaldosteronism occurs in congestive cardiac failure. So some individuals suddenly get heart attack and their heart fails and they die. Why? Because it may be a cause that their adrenal cortical hormones, especially aldosterone, is in excess. What happens when it is excess? Sodium retention takes place. What happens when sodium is retained? Water is said to be reabsorbed. What happens if water is reabsorbed? Blood volume increases, blood flow increases, heart rate increases, which may lead to cardiac failure. In addition to this, it may result in cirrhosis. That means disintegration of the liver tissue, cirrhosis of liver. And last one is adrenogenital syndrome. So the name itself says it has certain implications on the sex of the individual. It occurs due to the overproduction of the adrenal androgens only mainly. Why not about estrogens? So far, no disease encountered. Okay. So what happens when this takes place? In fetal life, it results in pseudo hermaphrodites or eunuchs. Okay. Why means both male sex characters and female sex characters are said to be present in the same subject, and both are said to be incomplete, leading to sterile individuals being born. And in childhood, in females, it is resulting in precocious sex development. Some have early menstruation, early breast formation are the characteristics in adrenogenital syndrome. So why we call it as syndrome? The difference between disease and syndrome is disease is characterized by only one feature. For example, we call it as malaria. Malaria is not a syndrome, it's a disease. What is the main feature of malaria? It is fever. Typhoid is a disease. The main feature is fever. But syndrome is not one feature, it is multiple features. And we have seen Cushing syndrome. There are so many features associated with it. Likewise, here also, there are so many features associated. In males, if it is taking place, it results in precocious growth of sex. That means male reaches puberty early and body producing the so-called characteristic feature where the precocious growth of sex takes place, and this is called as pocket Hercules or infant Hercules condition. So these are the different disorders associated with the adrenogenital syndrome. So in the next class, we'll deal with the sorry, there is something else in adults. In adults, reversal of sex characters is the main feature. In males, feminization occurs, which may not be common. In females, virilism occurs. What is virilism? Virilism is nothing but masculinization of female. Okay, the voice of the female becomes male type, face and body appear like male, beard develops, mustache develops, and menstruation stops, uterus and ovaries degenerates, and the clitoris enlarges. So these are the main characteristic features which are attributed to the female. Because why? Androgens are increasing number. When the androgens increase, the female have male characteristics, all male characteristics, a condition called as virilism. Okay, whereas androgens are increasing, male has nothing to do with this, except along with these androgens, if some estrogens also increase, it may result in feminization. That means certain female characteristics appearing in male individuals. Okay, so in the evening class, we'll discuss about the hormones of the adrenal medulla. Hope you understood well. I'll post this PPT once the class is over. Any doubts, please ask me. Otherwise, it's closed. Thank you.